Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. The saloon doors of the Golden Gulch exploded outward, flinging Jeb Stone into the harsh glare of midday. He sprawled on the parched earth, spitting out a bloody mix of spittle and shattered teeth. The overhead sun shimmered off the dusty ground in dizzying waves, amplifying the jackhammer in his skull. A raucous jeering spilled from the saloon's shadowed maw, led by the barkeep's bellow, "Stay gone, Stone. You're persona non grata in this town and every dive in it." Jeb levered himself up, ignoring the throb in his knuckles and the coppery taste clinging to his tongue. His gaze, narrowed by years of squinting against sun and trouble, drilled into the saloon. He swiped a hand across his face, smearing grime and blood into a mask. "Thick-headed fool," he grumbled, more to the baked earth than the absent barkeep. "Always got a mouth off." The town, a scattering of dilapidated buildings wilting under the oppressive heat, offered no solace. He couldn't recall its name, nor what sparked the fracas. The pattern was etched in his bones. Whiskey haze, a barbed remark, a shove escalating into a storm of fists. Towns banished him. Saloons barred him. Faces bore the map of his anger. He trudged toward the outskirts, each bootfall puffing up miniature dust devils. A dilapidated sign, its paint flaking like sunburnt skin, pointed in multiple directions. A half-obliterated name snagged his attention. Bell Rock. He recalled a whisper of it, a quiet valley town, a place where, according to some crusty prospector, honest work still sprouted. Honest work. The phrase felt alien. His existence had been a cycle of brawls, blues, and broken oaths. Each fight, each dram, a fleeting bomb against the memories that clawed at him: the lost farm, the betrayed family, the wasted future. He paused, leaning against the rough-hewn signpost, the splintered wood a small agony in his back. A welcome distraction from the hollowness inside. He closed his eyes, and for a heartbeat, her face bloomed his mother, her gentle smile, the melody of her humming as she kneaded dough, the work-worn tenderness of her hands. He could almost inhale the scent of fresh bread, the wild fragrance of the meadow behind their farm, the memory. A shard of glass twisting in the wound of his regret reminded him of the man he'd buried. A man swallowed by bitterness, a phantom of the hopeful boy. A boy who dreamed of building, of making her proud. He opened his eyes, her image dissolving into the hard-scrabble reality before him. He was a universe away from that boy, from that aspiration. He was Jeb Stone, the pugilist, the drunkard, the shame. He pushed off the post, jaw tight. Eyes like flint. He had to keep moving. Stagnation meant reckoning with ghosts, facing the truth he'd spent years evading. And he wasn't braced for that reckoning, not yet. His gaze tracked the horizon, where the faintest serration of mountains hinted at Bell Rock's location. A long shot, a fool's promise, but he'd exhausted his alternatives. Perhaps, in that backwater, he could outrun his demons. Or, if nothing else, find a quiet corner to bleed. He started walking, gravel crunching underfoot. The sun baked his back, dust swirled around his ankles, and the taste of blood persisted. He knew only that he couldn't remain. He had to gamble on the possibility of something more. As he walked, the prospector's words echoed in his ears. "Bell Rock's got a library, son. Run by a real lady." Miss Lydia Rose. She'll straighten you out, if anyone can. Jeb snorted. A library? A woman? What could they possibly offer a man like him? He was too far gone, too shattered. Yet the words lingered, a pilot light in the dark. Perhaps a smattering of learning couldn't hurt. He grasped things quickly. After all, didn't take long to learn how to deliver a knockout. Maybe reading was just another skill waiting to be mastered. The sun began its descent, painting the landscape in strokes of fire. Jeb pressed onward, body screaming, spirit drained, but eyes fixed on the distant peaks. Bell Rock, Miss Lydia Rose. Something felt poised to shift, for better or for worse. He just couldn't fathom the scale. He halted, fishing a crumpled scrap from his pocket. A wanted poster, bearing a caricature of his own features. The reward was paltry, scarcely enough for a decent meal, but it was a stark reminder of the life he was trying to shed. He crushed the poster in his fist and flung it aside, watching it dance away on the breeze like a fallen leaf. Not today, he rasped. Today, I'm walking toward something, not fleeing. He resumed his trek, the departing sun splashing the sky with vibrant hues. The air cooled, and the first stars pricked the darkening canvas, shimmering like distant possibilities. He was solitary but moving, lost but seeking. Jeb Stone, the brawler, the sought, the disgrace, but maybe, just maybe, something else resided within. He walked through the gathering night, propelled by a desperate hope and a stubborn refusal to surrender. He couldn't predict what awaited him in Bell Rock, but he knew he had to try. He owed it to himself, to the memory of his mother, to the ghost of the boy he once was. He owed it to the fragile flicker of hope that still burned. Bell Rock, a faint spark on the horizon, a promise in the void. And Jeb Stone, exiled from every saloon between Cheyenne and Carson City, was marching toward it, one weary step after another. Bell Rock Blues Bell Rock wasn't the shimmering promise Jeb had envisioned. Reaching the crest, swirling columns of dust danced mockingly before him, and the town unfolded a jumbled collection of sun-scalded buildings like discarded dominoes. They clustered together for solace, their wood fronts flaking under the desert glare. A few horses stood drowsily at the tie rails, their tails whisking away flies, while figures moved with a measured pace that hinted at lives etched with endurance. The air, thick and stagnant, carried the sense of baked earth, smoldering wood, and a faint, metallic tang that prickled Jeb's nostrils. He steered his weary mount down the incline, each hoofbeat puffing up miniature ochre clouds. Riding into Bell Rock conned. He scanned the faces' craggy countenances, carved by sun and wind, bearing witness to hardship, yet perhaps touched by a glimmer of expectation. A woman in faded calico tended drooping blossoms outside the general store. A knot of men played checkers on the mercantile's porch, and a solitary figure wrestled with a wagon wheel near the blacksmith's forge. Jeb paused, absorbing the scene. Scant as it was, it represented a beginning, an opportunity. The Golden Nugget Saloon, its chipped gilt letters an absurd boast, beckoned like a siren song in the simmering afternoon. He knew better. The bottle was a deceitful companion, having led him down a ruinous path. Clenching the reins, he spurred his horse onward, intending to seek out the library. A sanctuary. Miss Lydia Rose. The thought of her, the promise of quiet words and gentle counsel, offered a fragile bulwark against the tempest threatening to consume him. But the noted's call was insistent, a tangible pull. The boisterous sounds of revelry spilled into the street, an all-too-familiar tune that resonated deep within. He faltered, then muttered a curse. Just one drink, he reasoned, to blunt the edge after the grueling journey. He'd seek out Miss Rose tomorrow. Dismounting, the creak of the saddle a meager comfort, he tethered his horse, the beast sighing in relief. Smoothing his threadbare vest and raking a hand through his matted hair, he entered the saloon. The Golden Nugget was a cavernous space, steeped in shadow and noise, the scrape of chairs, the low hum of conversations, the crisp report of colliding billiard balls. Sawdust carpeted the floor, and the air swirled with stale beer, cheap liquor, and the aroma of unwashed bodies. A miasma of tobacco smoke clung to the low ceiling, blurring the light from the sputtering oil lamps. Jeb navigated towards the bar, the worn wood polished smooth by countless elbows. The bartender, a hulking figure sporting a waxed mustache and a suspicious gaze, wiped the paw. "Counter with a rag." "Whiskey," Jeb rasped, his voice raw. The bartender poured a generous measure, the amber liquid gleaming dully. Jeb downed it in one gulp, the fiery spirit searing its way down. He signaled for another, then another. Warmth spread through him, unraveling the knots that had tightened for weeks. Leaning against the bar, he surveyed the room. Several card games were underway, the players' faces masks of concentration. A woman with painted cheeks and weary eyes coaxed a sorrowful tune from a piano in the corner. Two cowboys bickered at the rear, their voices escalating with each round. Jeb ignored them, focusing on his drink. The familiar numbness began to creep in, the welcome oblivion that allowed him to forget, however fleetingly. "New in town?" Jeb turned to find a man beside him. Lean and rangy, with a sun-beaten face and piercing blue eyes, he wore a weathered leather vest and a silver buckle that flashed subtly. "Just arrived," Jeb replied, his tone carefully. "Bland. Figured. Haven't seen you around." "Name's Cole," he said, offering a hand. Jeb hesitated, then clasped it. "Jeb. What brings you to Bell Rock, Jeb?" Cole inquired, his eyes narrowing imperceptibly. "Looking for work," Jeb said, keeping it concise. "Work scarce," Cole observed, sipping his drink. "Unless you don't mind a little dirt." "I don't," Jeb responded, meeting Cole's gaze. The atmosphere thickened, charged with unspoken words, a veiled challenge. Jeb recognized the dance. He'd been through it countless times. "Heard tell you got run out of Carson City." A voice drawled from behind. Jeb turned to see one of the cowboys swaggering over, a sneer twisting his lips. He was built like a bull, with a thick neck and cruel mouth. "Didn't think they'd let trash like you set foot in Bell Rock," the cowboy continued, loud enough for all to hear. Jeb ignored him, turning back to his drink. "What's the matter, Stone? Lost your voice?" the cowboy taunted. "Or are you too busy running from your demons to face me?" Jeb's fists clenched, his knuckles bone white. The whiskey amplified the simmering rage within. He knew he should walk away. It was the sensible thing. But something inside him snapped. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowed to slits. "I don't know you," Jeb said, his voice a low growl. "And I don't have time for your nonsense." "Nonsense?" the cowboy sneered. "This ain't no game, Stone. It's about respect, something you clearly lack." He spat near Jeb's boots. That was it. The final spark. Jeb exploded forward, his fist connecting with the cowboy's jaw with a sickening crack. The cowboy stumbled back, dazed. A roar erupted from the saloon. The card game ceased, the piano fell silent, all eyes focused on the unfolding spectacle. Cole retreated, a flicker of grim amusement in his expression. The cowboy recovered quickly, his eyes blazing with fury. He bellowed and charged, swinging wildly. Jeb ducked, delivering a punch to the cowboy's nose. Blood streamed, and the cowboy howled. The fight was on. A brutal, chaotic fracas in the heart of the Golden Nugget. Fueled by whiskey and pent-up fury, Jeb fought with a savagery that surprised even him. He evaded blows, landed strikes, and felt the adrenaline surge through him. He was back. Back in the world he knew, a world of fists and fury. The world he had vowed to escape. The very world Miss Lydia Rose was trying to liberate him from. With a wave of self-disgust, he realized he'd failed before even trying. Despite his size, the cowboy was no match for Jeb's skill and raw intensity. Jeb landed a final, devastating blow to the cowboy's temple, and he collapsed, unconscious. Silence descended, broken only by Jeb's ragged breathing. He stood over the fallen man, fists clenched, body trembling. He scanned the faces, seeing a mixture of awe and apprehension. He was the Jeb Stone they'd all heard about, the brawler, the drunk, the pariah. He turned and stumbled out of the saloon, the cheers and jeers receding behind him. He wandered aimlessly through Bell Rock, the weight of his failing bearing down. The fragile ember of hope that had drawn him here was extinguished, replaced by the bitter taste of despair. He found his horse, still waiting. He mounted awkwardly, his movements stiff. He didn't know his destination, but he knew he couldn't remain. Not anymore. He kicked his horse into motion, leaving Bell Rock behind, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. The librarian's gaze, the Golden Nugget, vibrated with a frenzy of combat, glass shattering like brittle promises, and the raw cadence of enraged men. Jeb, marinated in rotgut and fueled by years of pent-up fury, stood at the epicenter of the chaos. A crunch echoed as his fist connected with a miner's face, the man collapsing across a table swimming in frothy beer. The saloon reeked of stale beer, sweat, and cheap tobacco, a pungent cocktail of vice. Oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, a piano man hammered out a tinny melody, its cheerfulness drowned by the uproar. A cruel satisfaction bloomed as Jeb's next strike landed squarely on the nose of a burly lumberjack, painting the sawdust floor with crimson. This brutal dance of aggression was an old, unwelcome partner, a waltz that always left him hollow. But amidst the swirling melee, a singular figure snagged his attention. Near the saloon doors that flapped like restless wings with each arrival or hurried exit, stood Miss Lydia Rose. Not cowering, not shrieking, not even particularly surprised. Her spine was straight, hands clasped with serene composure, her expression reserved. She observed the bedlam, as if it were a mere game of dominoes gone rowdy. Jeb faltered, a ripple of disorientation breaking his stride. The lumberjack, seizing an advantage, roared forward, but Jeb barely registered the threat. His gaze remained glued to the librarian. Her usually gentle eyes burned with an unexpected intensity. No fear, no disgust, just observation. It was unnerving. The lumberjack's fist slammed into Jeb's temple, a jolt of pain ricocheting through his skull. He stumbled, vision swimming, the metallic tang of blood coating his tongue. But even as he fought to stay upright, Miss Rose held his focus. Immobile, her lips were parted slightly, as if poised to speak, yet remaining silent. It was a quiet, unflinching scrutiny that sliced through the alcoholic haze and stirred something buried deep within his soul. He shoved the lumberjack aside with surprising force. He had to get out. He needed to escape the clamor, the savagery, and above all else, that disquieting gaze. He shouldered his way through the brawling throng, ignoring the jeers and curses that trailed him. Bursting through the doors, he gasped in the cool night air. The crispness was a balm against the saloon's stifling heat. Leaning against a weathered post, he sucked in lungfuls of air, his head pounding. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to banish the image of Miss Rose's face. Futile. That calm, unwavering stare was branded onto his memory. It was a challenge, an invitation, a silent question echoing in the chambers of his heart. What did she see? What could she possibly find worthy in a man like him? He opened his eyes, peering back at the golden nugget. The sounds of the brawl still spilled out, a discordant anthem of chaos and ruin. He craved the oblivion of whiskey and violence, the familiar comfort of self-destruction. But he couldn't succumb. Not now. He pushed away from the post, starting to walk. Destination unknown, but departure imperative. He had to flee this place, this town, this woman who had pierced his rough exterior to glimpse the shadows within. As he walked, a figure materialized from the darkness. Miss Lydia Rose. He froze, his pulse hammering against his ribs. Words failed him. He simply stood there, awaiting her pronouncement. She halted a few feet away, her expression an enigma in the moonlight. The silvery glow illuminated her features, accentuating the gentle curve of her cheek and the soft light in her eyes. "Mr. Jebediah," she began, her voice both soft and resolute. "That was unfortunate." He cringed. "I know," he admitted, his voice a low rumble. "I lost control." "Control is a tempestuous beast, Mr. Jebediah," she countered. "It must be tamed, not unleashed." He glanced down at his battered hands, knuckles bruised and swollen. "I don't know if I can tame it, Miss Rose. It's been running wild for too long." She closed the distance between them, her eyes locking with his. "Everyone is capable of change, Mr. Jebediah, even you." He met her gaze, searching for any trace of judgment or revulsion. He found only a steady, unwavering conviction. "Why do you care?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Why waste your time on someone like me?" A small, gentle smile softened her features, reaching her eyes. "Because I perceive something within you, Mr. Jebediah, something you fail to see in yourself." "And what's that?" he asked, skepticism lacing his tone. "Potential," she stated. "The potential to transcend your present circumstances." He scoffed. "Potential? I'm a saloon brawler, Miss Rose. That's all I'll ever amount to." "That's simply untrue," she said, shaking her head. "You possess a mind, Mr. Jebediah, a keen, discerning mind. You merely need guidance in how to cultivate it." From her satchel, she produced a slender, well-worn volume and extended it toward him. "Take this," she urged. "Read it. Then, pay me a visit. We shall discuss it further." Hesitation warred within him. He regarded the book, then back at her. "What is it?" he asked. "A collection of verse," she replied, "penned by a man well acquainted with both darkness and light." He accepted the book, his fingers grazing hers. A jolt of something unfamiliar sparked between them. "Thank you," he said, his voice still rough, yet tinged with sincerity. "You're welcome, Mr. Jebediah," she said. "I anticipate seeing you soon." She turned and departed, leaving him alone beneath the moonlit sky, the book clutched tightly in his hand. He lowered his gaze to the cover. It bore the title, "Leaves of Grass." The meaning eluded him, but one thing was certain. His life had irrevocably shifted. Whether for good or ill remained to be seen. Sanctuary of silence, Jeb groaned. The desert sun, a merciless brand on his forehead. Each throb of agony mirrored the dull ache throbbing above his left brow, a memento from the prior evening's foolishness at the Golden Nugget. He levered himself upright, wincing as his ribs offered a sharp protest. Miniature cyclones of dust spiraled across the barren landscape, mocking his discomfort. He spat, the bitter tang of stale liquor and regret clinging to his palate. Water. A dire necessity. He'd stumbled out of the saloon some time before the first hint of dawn. Lydia Rose's silent disapproval a sharper sting than any whiskey. He'd claimed a pitiful patch of shade beneath a gnarled mesquite, promptly losing consciousness. Now, the sun seemed bent on slow roasting him. He pushed, himself to his feet, the world tilting dangerously. Shade, a drink, and perhaps a balm for the roiling storm in his stomach. He lurched towards Bell Rock, its sandstone formations mirage-like in the shimmering heat. The familiar facades of the wooden shops offered little solace. The Golden Nugget, its doors gaping wide, whispered promises of oblivion. But not now. Not after the night before. Not after disappointing her. He trudged past the saloon. The cacophony of revelry and clinking glasses, a lure he fought to resist. His fingers instinctively sought the reassuring weight of his blade. Gone. He recalled Lydia Rose's gaze, unwavering, a challenge to rise above his craft. Baser instincts. He paused, her image a fleeting mirage of hope in the desolate landscape of his mind. The sun was an oppressive weight. He spotted the water trough by the blacksmiths, but the mere thought of navigating the throng of burly, sweating men was exhausting. He craved respite, quiet, a sanctuary. His gaze drifted across the thoroughfare, lighting on a modest structure, set back from the others. Faded cerulean letters spelled out, Bell Rock Library. A library? He scoffed inwardly. What could a man like him possibly find there? Yet, the vision of hushed, cool darkness held a potent appeal. He crossed the street, each step stirring up clouds of dust. He hesitated at the entrance, his hand hovering over the weathered handle. The library felt like a world apart, a distant galaxy from the smoky dives and gritty streets he frequented. He was an outsider, an interloper. He remembered the volume Lydia Rose had pressed into his grasp. Walt Whitman's verses, untouched, abandoned. In his saddlebag, another vow broken. He drew a deep breath, the air surprisingly crisp and still. He nudged the door open. A rush of cool, dry air enveloped him, a soothing balm against his sun-scorched skin. The aroma of aged paper and leather filled his senses. A stark contrast to the reek of stale beer and cheap perfume he knew so well. The library was dim, light subdued by heavy drapes. Rows of towering shelves lined the walls, laden with volumes of every imaginable size. The silence was profound, broken only by the measured ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. He lingered inside the doorway, feeling conspicuous and awkward, a clumsy intruder in a world of elegance. He anticipated a swift dismissal, a curt reminder that he didn't belong, but it never came. A young woman, spectacles perched delicately on her nose, sat engrossed behind a massive oak desk. She remained oblivious to his presence. Jeb shifted his weight, his boots scraping against the polished wood floor. He cleared his throat, the sound rough and unfamiliar. "Excuse me," he mumbled, the words feeling clumsy and out of place. The woman looked up, her eyes widening momentarily behind her lenses. Not Lydia Rose. This one was younger, a nervous energy radiating from her like heat from a forge. "Can I assist you?" she inquired, her voice gentle and hesitant. Jeb shuffled his feet. Just looking for a place to cool down." The woman blinked, then a subtle understanding dawned in her gaze. "Certainly," she replied, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Please, make yourself at home. There are chairs near the window." She indicated a small reading alcove bathed in diffused sunlight. Jeb hesitated, self-conscious. I ain't much of a reader," he admitted, feeling warmth rise up his neck. "That's perfectly fine," the woman said, her smile widening slightly. "Everyone is welcome here." He ambled over to the reading nook, feeling like a fraud. He eased himself into a threadbare wand armchair, the yielding cushions a surprising comfort. He closed his eyes, relishing the stillness and the cool air. He could discern the faint whisper of turning pages as the young woman returned to her book. He opened his eyes, absorbing the details of the room. Shelves overflowed with time-worn books, their titles gleaming in gold leaf. Portraits of austere figures watched him from the walls, their gazes seeming to follow his every move. Felt a surge of loneliness, a longing for something intangible. He was surrounded by knowledge, by stories, by the collective wisdom of ages. Yet he stood apart, separated by a wall of ignorance and violence. He thought of Lydia Rose, her unwavering faith in his dormant potential. Did she truly believe he could change, could evolve into something better? He doubted it. He was Jebediah Stone, Saloon Brawler and rabble-rouser. That's all he'd ever been, all he'd be. He reached into his pocket, extracting a crumpled cigarette. He was about to ignite it when the setting registered. He paused, then tucked the cigarette back into his pocket. The young woman behind the desk looked up again, a silent question in her eyes. "Sorry," Jeb mumbled, his face flushing anew. "Didn't mean to." "It's quite all right," she reassured him softly. Perhaps you'd care for something to read?" Jeb shook his head. "Nah, I wouldn't know where to begin." "We have volumes of every kind," she said, her tone encouraging. "Stories, poems, histories, something for everyone." Jeb surveyed the room, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of books. He couldn't fathom spending his time absorbed in reading, deciphering pages packed with words he barely grasped. "Maybe later," he mumbled, his voice a bare whisper. The young woman offered a gentle smile. "Whenever you're ready." She turned back to her book, leaving Jeb alone with his thoughts and the deep quiet of the library. He closed his eyes once more, the throbbing in his head gradually ebbing away. The library was a haven, a retreat from the brutal realities of his existence. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a faint flicker of hope sparked within him, a tiny seed of possibility. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to him than fists and whiskey. Maybe, just maybe, he could learn to cultivate a more gentle nature. A novel proposition. The noontide glare blazed against Jeb's back as he nudged open the library door. A hesitant jingle from the overhead bell, his only greeting. Still coated in the previous night's grit, he felt Lydia's disapproval like a chill, a burden that dwarfed even his aching head. The cool interior offered sweet relief, the reek of aged paper and tanned hide, surprisingly restorative. He located her instantly, framed behind the polished oak counter, brow furrowed over an immense volume. Sunlight fractured through the window, illuminating swirling dust motes and tracing the delicate curve of her jaw. He watched her for a long moment before she noticed him, studying the way errant auburn strands escaped her severe coil. The gentle cadence of her breathing, He'd never truly noticed women before, but Lydia Rose was an exception. She radiated a quiet fortitude, a serenity that beckoned like a beacon in fog. Finally her gaze lifted, warm honey meeting his. He saw no recrimination there, no hint of distaste, merely a quiet understanding that twisted his gut with shame. "Mr. Stone," she greeted him, her voice a silken murmur. "I half expected you might." He shuffled, scuffing the floor. "Miss Rose," he mumbled, eyes downcast. I owe you an apology for last night." "Apologies are readily offered, Mr. Stone," she responded, her tone gentle yet firm. "Actions resonate more profoundly. Please sit. I've prepared some tea." He hesitated, then nodded, dragging a chair and sinking into it with a sigh. The library stood deserted except for them, the hush punctuated only by the measured tick of a grandfather clock in the corner. He watched as she poured, steam unfurling in delicate spirals, carrying chamomile and a subtle, floral fragrance he couldn't quite name. "Lemon verbena," she offered, as if divining his thoughts. "It's reputed to settle frayed nerves." He took a tentative sip. Far removed from his usual fiery whiskey, it proved surprisingly soothing. "I unearthed something for you," she said, setting down the teapot. From beneath the desk she produced a book, its binding worn smooth, the gilt lettering faded almost beyond recognition. She placed it before him. Jeb stared. He hadn't opened a book since boyhood, before everything had imploded. He traced the cover with a roughened finger. "What is it?" he asked, his voice a low rasp. "It's entitled The Count of Monte Cristo," she replied. "By Alexander Dumas." "Never heard of it," he confessed. "A narrative of treachery, confinement, and ultimately reclamation," she elaborated, her eyes alight with almost childlike enthusiasm. "A man unjustly condemned, who seeks restitution and discovers something deeper." Jeb frowned. Reclamation. The word had shadowed him for years, an idea in which he struggled to believe. "Sounds like a fancy tale for folks with fancy troubles," he said, his skepticism palpable. Lydia smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips. "Perhaps," she conceded. "Or perhaps it speaks to anyone who has known the sting of loss, the ache of betrayal, the yearning for another chance." She opened the book to the initial page, the paper fragile and translucent. "Listen," she urged, and began to read, her voice painting a vivid scene that transported him across time and space. On the 24th of February, 1815, the Pharaon, arriving from Smyrna, Trieste, and Naples, sailed into the port of Marseille. He listened, spellbound, to the story of Edmond Dantes, a young mariner brimming with promise, his life unjustly forfeited. He could almost taste the chill of the Chateau d'If, the bottomless despair of unending isolation. He glanced at Lydia, her face animated by the narrative, her voice imbued with passion. He'd never encountered anyone who read quite like that. She didn't merely recite the words, she inhabited them. After a few pages, she paused, her gaze expectant. "Well?" she prompted. "Your thoughts?" Jeb swallowed, his throat raspy. He was unsure what to think. He'd arrived expecting censure, expecting her to write him off as beyond redemption, a hopeless dipsomaniac. Instead, she'd offered solace and a story. "It's different," he managed finally. "Not what I anticipated." "Different in a pleasing way, or otherwise?" she pressed gently. He hesitated. "I can't say yet," he admitted. "But it piques my interest." A genuine smile blossomed across Lydia's features, kindling the depths of her eyes. "Interest is a potent force, Mr. Stone," she observed. "It can guide you to unforeseen destinations." She closed the book and extended it to him. "Take it," she said. "Read at your leisure. And should questions arise, you know where to find me." Jeb accepted the book, its weight surprisingly substantial in his grasp. He examined the cover once more, the faded script, the enigmatic title. The Count of Monte Cristo. He wondered what impelled a man to become a count, and what drove his thirst for vengeance. He rose, experiencing a spark of something dormant within him, hope. Not the ephemeral, drunken illusion he chased at the bottom of a bottle, but something profound, something enduring. "Thank you, Miss Rose," he said, his voice still rough, but less abrasive now, "for the tea and the book." "You're welcome, Mr. Stone," she replied. "I suspect you and the Count share a certain kinship." He didn't grasp her meaning, but he refrained from asking. He simply nodded and turned to depart, the book clutched firmly. Stepping back into the unforgetting sunlight, he couldn't shake the conviction that he was embarking on a journey, not just through the pages of a novel, but into the shadowy recesses of his own being. Rough hands, gentle words. Jeb Stone was a silhouette against the lamplight, bent over the dog-eared Count of Monte Cristo. Silence reigned in the library, punctuated only by the stately tick-tock of the grandfather clock and the whisper of turning pages as Miss Lydia Rose organized volumes behind her counter. A calloused finger traced the printed words, so unlike the coarse language of the tavern he knew. He cleared his throat, the sound a dry rasp in the stillness. "On the 24th of February." The syllables snagged in his throat, his brow furrowing with the effort. The letters swam before him, mocking his clumsy attempts. Lydia Rose glanced up, a wellspring of patient understanding in her gaze. She offered no interruption, no prompting, only her quiet presence as encouragement. Jed pressed on, his voice a low rumble. "The 24th of February, 1815. The far yon." The word emerged mangled, frustration tightening his features. He slammed the book shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. Curse it all. Can't even manage a simple sentence. Lydia Rose approached, her steps hushed on the polished floor. Her slender hand rested on the book's cover. "Far on, Mr. Stone," she corrected gently, her tone soothing as balm. "There's no disgrace in finding this challenging. Learning is a journey." He met her gaze, a turbulent mix of anger and mortification swirling within him. "A journey I can't afford, Miss Rose. I'm a bruiser, not a scholar. These hands were made for breaking, not reading." He displayed his fists, scarred maps of past brawls, tools for gripping a tankard, not turning fragile leaves of parchment. Lydia Rose held his gaze, unwavering. "Those hands," she said softly, "are capable of more than just destruction, Mr. Stone. They can cultivate, they can fashion, they can comprehend." Delicately, she reopened the book, indicating the offending word. "Try it again, slowly. On." He hesitated, then echoed the word, his voice less gruff. On. Still unfamiliar, but smoother now. "Good da," Lydia Rose said, a nascent tan law. Smile touching her lips. "Now." The whole sentence. He drew a breath and began anew, his tone gaining confidence with each syllable. "On the 24th of February, 1815, the Pharian arrived at Marseille." He paused, seeking her approval. "Excellent," she affirmed. See? "You're progressing," he continued, his voice still rough-hewn, but now threaded with purpose. The narrative unfolded before him: treachery, injustice, and a burning thirst for vengeance. He felt a kinship with Edmond Dantes, wrongly condemned and yearning for retribution. He, too, knew the sting of being trapped, defined by a past he wished to escape. Lydia Rose sat beside him, occasionally smoothing his pronunciation or illuminating an obscure phrase. She offered no indulgence, no condescension. She simply guided, a gentle hand at his back when he stumbled. As time slipped by, the quote, "library walls seemed to dissolve," replaced by the stone chill of Chateau d'If and the gilded cages of Parisian high society. The Jeb Stone of the saloons seemed to recede, replaced by a man glimpsing a wider world. He faltered, he struggled, but he pushed forward, driven by an awakening desire to understand, to grow, to prove himself worthy of this quiet sanctuary and the steadfast belief of Miss Lydia Rose. He encountered a particularly dense passage, thick with ornate prose and twisting clauses. He halted, frustration threatening to resurface. "This is hopeless," he grumbled, pushing the volume away. "I'll never decipher this." Lydia Rose's hand covered his forearm, her touch surprisingly firm. "Don't surrender now, Mr. Stone," she urged, her voice resolute yet kind. "You've come too far. The most exquisite prizes often lie behind the toughest barriers." He looked at her, seeing a reflection of a potential he hadn't known he possessed. He reclaimed the book, his calloused fingers gingerly turning the fragile pages. He inhaled deeply and began to read, his voice measured and deliberate. He felt a singular confluence of joy and despair. The language remained a challenge, pronunciation imperfect, but he persevered, fueled by the promise of absolution, the pull of knowledge, and the unwavering faith of a woman who saw beyond the rough exterior of a saloon brawler. Tea and transformation, the rhythm settled into a comforting routine. 3 afternoons a week, Jeb found himself climbing the Crow. Library steps. The familiar scent of aged paper and beeswax, a stark contrast to the stale beer and sawdust he was accustomed to. He'd leave the sun-baked street behind, the shouts and hurried footsteps fading as he entered the quiet sanctuary Miss Lydia Rose had created. She always greeted him with a smile, a subtle crinkling around her eyes that spoke of genuine warmth. "Mr. Stone, right on time. Shall we continue our journey with the Count?" He'd nod, the gruffness in his voice softening ever so slightly. "If you're still willing to put up with my stumbling over the words." Lydia chuckled, a light, airy sound that always seemed to ease the tension in his shoulders. "Nonsense. You're improving with each session. And remember, even the most eloquent speakers were once beginners." She'd then lead him to their usual table, the one bathed in the afternoon sun, and pour him a cup of tea. Earl Grey. She said it was. Jeb wouldn't have known the difference between that and ditch water, but the warmth of the mug in his hands, the delicate fragrance, was a welcome change from the bite of whiskey. The tea ceremony itself became a ritual. Lydia would steep the leaves with practiced grace, her movements precise and calming. While they waited, she'd ask about his day, not probing or intrusive, but with a genuine interest that surprised him. He found himself, hesitantly at first, sharing snippets of his life, not the brawls, not the drinking, but the small things. The way the light hit the mountains at dawn, the stray dog he'd seen scavenging near the saloon, the sudden urge he'd had to plant something, anything in the barren patch behind his room. "So, Dante's escapes," Jeb said, after a moment, pushing the book slightly. "Gets his hands on a fortune. And then, revenge." Lydia steepled her fingers, her gaze thoughtful. Revenge is a powerful motivator, Mr. Stone. But is it truly fulfilling? Jeb frowned. He'd spent a good portion of his life fueled by anger, by the burning need to even the score. Seems like it to Dante's. Does it? Lydia countered gently. Or does it consume him? Does it bring him peace? Or simply replace one emptiness with another? He thought about that as he picked up the book and began reading. The words still felt clumsy on his tongue. But he persevered, Lydia patiently correcting his pronunciation, explaining nuances he missed. Sometimes they wouldn't read at all, just talk. About the characters, about their motivations, about the choices they made. And somehow, in discussing the Count of Monte Cristo, Jeb found himself grappling with his own choices, his own demons. One afternoon, a particularly boisterous group from the saloon stumbled into the library, their laughter echoing through the quiet space. Jeb instinctively tensed, his hand clenching into a fist. He saw the flicker of apprehension in Lydia's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a look of quiet resolve. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice clear and firm, though not unkind. "This is a place of quiet contemplation. If you wish to browse, you are welcome, but I must ask you to keep your voices down." The men, momentarily taken aback by her composure, mumbled apologies and shuffled towards the newspaper rack. Jeb watched them, a strange mix of anger and something akin to shame churning within him. These were his people, the men he drank and fought with, the men he understood. But suddenly, they felt foreign. Later, after the men had left, Lydia refilled his tea. "Are you all right, Mr. Stone?" He hesitated. "Yeah. Fine." But the lie felt heavy on his tongue. He glanced at the book, at the meticulously organized shelves, at the quiet dignity of the room. "It's just I don't know if I belong here." Lydia smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Everyone belongs here, Mr. Stone. If they seek knowledge, if they seek solace, if they simply seek a moment of peace. This library is for everyone. But what if I can't? Change?" The words were barely a whisper, a raw confession ripped from the depths of his soul. "What if I'm just a brute?" Lydia reached across the table and gently placed her hand over his. Her touch was surprisingly firm, surprisingly comforting. "Nonsense," she said again, her voice filled with conviction. "I see more in you than you see in yourself, Mr. Stone. You have a capacity for kindness, for understanding, for gentleness. It may be buried deep, but it is there, and I believe you are capable of anything you set your mind to." He looked at her hand, at the delicate bones beneath the soft skin, and then up at her face, at the unwavering belief in her eyes. He didn't deserve her faith. He knew that, but something shifted within him, a tiny seed of hope taking root in the barren landscape of his heart. He closed his eyes briefly, then took a deep breath and met her gaze. "Thank you, Miss Rose," he said. The words rough, but sincere. "Thank you for everything." The following week, Jeb arrived at the library with a small, carefully wrapped package. He placed it on the table before Lydia, his cheeks flushed with a nervous energy. "What's this?" she asked, her brow furrowed with curiosity. It's nothing much," he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. "Just something I thought you might like." Lydia carefully unwrapped the package, revealing a small, clay pot filled with a vibrant purple flower. She gasped softly, her eyes widening with delight. "It's beautiful, Mr. Stone." "Where did you?" "Found it growing wild up in the hills," he explained, still avoiding her gaze. "Thought it might brighten up the place." Lydia picked up the pot, turning it over in her hands. "It's perfect. Thank you, Jeb." She said his name for the first time, and the sound of it on her lips sent a strange shiver down his spine. He finally met her gaze, a hesitant smile playing on his lips. "You're welcome, Miss Rose." The flower sat on the windowsill, bathed in sunlight, a splash of color against the muted tones of the library. It was a small thing, a simple gesture, but it was a symbol of something more. A symbol of change, of hope, of the slow, painstaking process of transformation. A transformation fueled by books, by tea, and by the unwavering belief of a librarian who saw a man beneath the brawler. Whispers in the wind. The wind carried more than dust and tumbleweeds through Bell Rock that week. It carried whispers. Little puffs of speculation that clung to the eaves of houses, snaked around the porch swings, and slithered under doorways. Whispers about Jeb Stone and Miss Lydia Rose. It started subtly. A raised eyebrow at the mercantile when Jeb bought a small bag of sugar, far more than a bachelor like him would need. A knowing glance exchanged over the hymn books at Sunday service when he wasn't there. A hushed conversation between Martha Higgins and Bessie May as they hung laundry, their voices dropping to a conspiratorial murmur when Jeb's name was mentioned. "Did you see him headin' toward the library again yesterday?" Martha asked, pinning a freshly washed shirt to the line. Her eyes narrowed, reflecting the harsh desert sun. Bessie May nodded, her lips pursed. "Twice. Once in the mornin', and again after noon." "Something ain't right about it, Martha. A man like that is spendin' so much time with a woman like Miss Lydia." "He's got that look about him, too," Martha continued. "Soft around the edges. You don't get that way from drinkin' and fightin'." The whispers grew bolder, fueled by boredom and a healthy dose of small-town suspicion. At the general store, Old Man Fitzwilliam, who claimed to know everything about everyone, held court with a group of men gathered around the pot-bellied stove. "Stone's got hisself tangled in a spider web," he declared, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into a nearby bucket. "Lydia Rose is a good woman, a saint near as I can tell. But Stone? He's trouble. Always has been, always will be." A younger man, a ranch hand named Billy, spoke up. "Maybe he's just learnin' to read," he offered tentatively, earning him a chorus of snorts and derisive laughter. "Learnin' to read?" Fitzwilliam scoffed. "A man that size, with those hands? He's learnin' somethin' all right, but it ain't from no books." The gossip intensified, painting Jeb and Lydia's burgeoning friendship with lurid strokes. Some said Jeb was taking advantage of Lydia's kindness, using her for some nefarious purpose they couldn't quite articulate. Others suggested Lydia was naive, blind to the darkness that lurked beneath Jeb's gruff exterior. A few, the more romantic souls, whispered of a May-December romance, a scandalous pairing that was both titillating and deeply unsettling to the townsfolk's sensibilities. Buck, nursing a beer at the Golden Nugget Saloon, caught snippets of these conversations. He heard the snide remarks, the veiled accusations, the outright slander. He usually ignored the town's idle chatter, but this was different. This concerned Jeb. He overheard two men at a nearby table discussing the situation in hushed tones. "He ain't good enough for her," one of them muttered, slamming his fist on the table, rattling the glasses. "She deserves better than some washed-up brawler." Buck's jaw tightened. He knew Jeb's past better than most, but he also saw the change in him, the flicker of something decent struggling to emerge. He didn't say anything, didn't want to draw attention to himself. Instead, he finished his beer, the bitter taste doing little to soothe the anger that was rising within him. He found himself outside the library the next afternoon, ostensibly on his way to the blacksmith. He lingered across the street, watching the familiar adobe building. The windows were open, and he could hear the faint murmur of voices inside. He couldn't make out the words, but he recognized Lydia's calm, measured tone and the deeper rumble of Jeb's voice. He saw Jeb leave a short while later, his shoulders squared, a thoughtful expression on his face. He walked with a purpose Buck hadn't seen in him before. Buck watched him go, his brow furrowed. He knew the kind of damage words could do, especially when they were laced with malice and prejudice. He worried about Jeb, about how he would handle the town's disapproval. Inside the library, Lydia tidied the books on her desk, oblivious to the storm brewing outside. She hummed a tuneless melody, her thoughts occupied with the passage they had been discussing that afternoon, Edmund Dante's initial thirst for revenge. She wondered if Jeb truly understood the destructive nature of such a desire, if he saw the parallels in his own life. She glanced at the small wildflower Jeb had given her, pressed carefully between the pages of her favorite book of poetry. It was a fragile thing, easily crushed, but it represented something significant to her. A small act of kindness, a gesture of hope. She hoped the whispers wouldn't reach him, wouldn't undo the progress he had made. She knew Jeb was strong, but even the strongest men could be broken by the weight of public opinion. That evening, Jeb sat on the porch of his small cabin, staring out at the vast expanse of the desert. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a breathtaking display of nature's artistry. He usually found solace in the quiet solitude, but tonight a sense of unease settled over him. He couldn't quite place it. A feeling of being watched, of being judged. He chalked it up to his own paranoia, a lingering residue of his past life. He tried to focus on the words he had read that day, on the lessons Lydia was trying to impart. He wanted to be better, to be worthy of the kindness she had shown him. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the doubts that crept into his mind. He imagined Lydia's voice, calm and reassuring, guiding him through the darkness. He clung to that image, to the hope that he could somehow escape the shadows of his past and build a new future for himself, a future where he could finally speak softly and leave the brawls behind. Little did he know the true nature of the whispers carried on the wind, and the challenge they would soon pose to his newfound path. The bully's provocation, the saloon doors groaned open, their rusty hinges protesting Jeb's entrance with a low complaint. Inside, the air tasted of flat beer, ground wood, and a faint bitter tang reminiscent of charred timbers, a ghost of some long-ago mishap. The dimness was a heavy cloak after the sunlit clarity he'd found among the pages of his books. Buck was propped against the bar, nursing a whiskey, his gaze a bloodshot brand on Jeb. A slow, almost cruel smile peeled back his lips, revealing nicotine-stained teeth. "Well, well, if it isn't Stone. What brings you slumming? Thought you were cemented into that book-stuffed crypt with Miss Rose." Ignoring the barb, Jeb approached the bar, catching Silas's eye. The barkeep, a lean, sinewy man, arched a dubious eyebrow at Jeb's request for water, but poured it nonetheless. "Water, Jeb?" Buck bellowed, his laughter echoing off the low-slung ceiling, drawing curious glances from the other patrons. A ripple of snickers spread through the room. "What happened to the iron-gutted Jebediah? Gone delicate on us, have you?" Jeb sipped the water, the coolness a welcome contrast to the simmering heat in his veins. He kept his attention focused on the scarred surface of the bar, refusing to acknowledge Buck's presence. He wouldn't offer him that satisfaction. "Heard you've taken to scribbling," Buck persisted, his tone laced with mockery. He detached himself from the bar and sauntered towards Jeb, his boots drumming a heavy rhythm on the floorboards. "Big words and fancy phrases, is it? Gonna pen us a sonnet, Stone? Perhaps about posies and painted wings?" The jeering intensified, fueled by Buck's needling. Jeb's jaw clenched, the muscles in his neck corded tight. That familiar heat began to bloom in his chest, the urge to retaliate, to silence Buck with a swift, decisive blow. But Lydia's face rose in his mind, her encouraging smile, the serene light in her eyes. He swallowed the anger down, a bitter pill. "Leave him be, Buck," Silas grumbled, swiping at the bar with a soiled rag. "He ain't bothering anyone." Buck paid him no mind. He was close enough now that Jeb could taste the whiskey fumes on his breath, feel the simmering hostility radiating from him. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a menacing rumble. "What's the matter, Stone? Tongue-tied all of a sudden? Or did Miss Rose teach you a new one, all sugar and spice? Teaching you how to curtsy and flutter your eyelashes, is she?" Jeb's grip on the glass tightened, his knuckles bone white. He could feel the weight of every eye in the saloon pressing down on him, anticipating his breaking point, anticipating a brawl. "Heard you been dipping into that Frenchie," Buck sneered, circling Jeb like a carrion bird. "The Count of Monte something or other? Sounds like the kind of thing a mollycoddle would read. All about getting even, isn't it? But you haven't got the stomach for vengeance anymore, do you, Stone? You're too busy puzzling over your primers." A pulse throbbed insistently in Jeb's temple. He tasted the coppery tang of blood where his teeth worried at the inside of his cheek. He drew a slow breath, remembering Lydia's lessons on stillness. Inhale, exhale, anchor yourself. "You used to be a man, Stone," Buck said, dripping contempt. "A real man. Now you're just pathetic, leashed, broken by a bookworm." He punctuated bookworm with a wad of spit that landed perilously close to Jeb's worn boot. The room went utterly silent. The air crackled with expectation, thick enough to taste. Even Silas stilled, his eyes wide with a premonition of violence. For a moment, Jeb closed his eyes, picturing the well-worn pages, the graceful script, the worlds that had opened to him. He thought of the quiet evenings in the library, the comforting scent of aged paper, the warmth of Lydia's presence. He thought of the man he was striving to become. He opened his eyes, his gaze clear and unwavering. He placed the glass of water carefully on the bar. He met Buck's gaze directly, his expression devoid of fury, devoid of fear. There was only a quiet resolve. "You're wrong, Buck," Jeb said, his voice even and steady. "I'm more of a man now than I ever was." Buck's eyes narrowed, his face twisting with a grotesque blend of disbelief and rage. He raised a fist, cocked to strike. "We'll just see about that, Stone." But before Buck could unleash his blow, Jeb stepped back, a mere sliver of space, enough to evade the punch. He didn't raise his own hands. He didn't recoil. He simply held his ground, his gaze fixed on Buck's. "I'm not going to fight you, Buck," Jeb stated. "Not tonight. Not ever again." A profound silence descended upon the saloon. Buck stared at Jeb, his face a roadmap of bewilderment and fury. He lowered his fist slowly, his chest heaving with thwarted rage. He hadn't anticipated this response. He'd expected a brawl, the Jeb he knew. He'd expected weakness, capitulation. You coward," Buck spat, the word venomous. "You're nothing but a lily-livered coward." Jeb offered no response. He simply turned on his heel and walked away, his shoulders squared, his head held high. He pushed through the swinging doors, leaving Buck stranded in the center of the room, a thundercloud of frustration etched on his features. Stepping out into the crisp night air, Jeb could feel the weight of the town's collective judgment pressing down. This, he knew, wouldn't be the end of it. But he also knew that he had taken a crucial first step, a small but significant stride towards becoming the person he aspired to be. And that, he understood, was a victory in itself. Poetry and promises. The silence that followed Jeb's refusal was a palpable thing, heavier than a gambler's debt. He exited, feeling the collective gaze prickle his skin, yet the anticipated thrill of a brawl never ignited. Instead, an unexpected sense of liberation washed over him, a quiet act of rebellion that resonated deep within. He drifted towards the library, the twilight sun casting long ochre shadows from the dust devils dancing around his worn boots. The library offered respite, a haven detached from Bell Rock's boisterous spirit. The aroma of antique paper and cured leather acted as a salve, a comfort surpassing any liquor's fleeting solace. Lydia sat at her station, framed by the gentle aura of a kerosene lamp, her brow knitted in concentration as she meticulously documented a fresh inventory of books. Her face brightened upon his arrival, her smile igniting an unfamiliar ache in his chest. "Jeb, what a pleasant surprise!" Her voice possessed the sweetness of honeyed tea, a distinct contrast to the gravelly tones he typically encountered. "Needed a replenishment," he mumbled, gesturing towards the towering stacks. Lydia chuckled, a delicate sound that banished the gloom lurking in the room's periphery. "Of course! How fares your journey through the Count of Monte Cristo?" "It's dense," he confessed, rubbing the back of his neck. "But I'm navigatin' it. It's captivatin'." She beamed. "I have another selection I believe you'll appreciate. Please, come." She guided him to a small table by the window, where a slender volume lay open. Its pages showcased elegant calligraphy, unfamiliar symbols arranged with meticulous precision. "This," she announced, her voice hushed in, "reverence, is poetry." Jeb scowled. "Poetry? Sounds elaborate." "Perhaps. But it also explores emotions, articulating the inner world with greater eloquence than common language." She paused, then commenced to read, her voice taking on a melodic quality. She intoned verses from Tennyson's Ulysses, her eyes closed, her face awash in lamplight. Jeb didn't grasp every word, yet the rhythm, the cadence, reverberated within him. He perceived a man, battle-worn yet resolute, determined to persevere, to perpetually seek something beyond the horizon. He glimpsed a reflection of himself, not as he existed, but as, quote, he aspired to become. When she concluded, the stillness resonated deeply. Jeb swallowed hard, his throat constricted. What was that about?" "About preserving optimism, even amidst despair." Lydia responded softly, opening her eyes. "About refusing to surrender to hopelessness." He glanced down at his hands, roughened and etched with scars, hands accustomed to delivering blows and shattering bones. Hands that seemed incongruous within this tranquil, refined space. "I ain't one for wishful thinkin'," he muttered. "Everyone possesses hope, Jeb," she countered, reaching across the table to cover his hand with hers. Her touch, gentle as a feather, sent a surge through him, a warmth that permeated his very being. Sometimes it merely requires a nudge. She withdrew her hand and returned to the book. "This is Walt Whitman," she explained. "He celebrated the common individual, acknowledging the beauty inherent in the everyday. Listen." And once more, she began to read, her voice weaving tapestries of words. Whitman depicted fields of golden wheat, vibrant cityscapes, and the dignity inherent in hard labor. He spoke of the interconnectedness of all beings, of the divine spark residing within each human soul. Jeb closed his eyes, allowing the words to cascade over him. Envisioned himself, not as a pugilist, a drunkard, a man defined by his past transgressions, but as something more substantial, something worthy. Upon opening his eyes, his gaze met hers. Tears welled. Though he couldn't articulate the reason, he felt profoundly affected, deeply moved, utterly awakened. I liked that," he said, his voice raspy. "It made me feel things I didn't know I could feel." Lydia smiled. "That is poetry's gift, Jeb. It can unlock dormant emotions." He examined the table, tracing the wood's swirling pattern with his fingertip. "I desire transformation, Lydia," he blurted, the words spilling forth in a torrent. "I no longer wish to be that man, the perpetual combatant, the eternally enraged. I yearn to be someone you can admire." Lydia's smile broadened, her eyes alight. "Jeb, I hold you in high regard already. You've progressed so much." He shook his head. "Nay, I haven't accomplished anything worthy yet, but I will. I pledge to you, I will." He faced her, his expression earnest, pleading. "Instruct me, Lydia. Teach me to be the better version of myself. Teach me to speak with gentleness." She reached across the table once more, enfolding his hand within hers. "I shall, Jeb," she vowed, her voice brimming with warmth. "I promise you, I shall." He squeezed her hand lightly, then released it. He rose, imbued with a newfound purpose. He recognized the path ahead wouldn't be easy. The journey would be arduous and lengthy. Yet, for the first time in years, he felt aligned in the right direction. He turned to depart, pausing at the doorway. "Lydia?" "Yes, Jeb?" "Thank you," he murmured, his voice subdued, "for everything you've done." He stepped into the night, the cool air caressing his face. Stars glittered like diamonds scattered across a dark plush fabric. He inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the bracing, invigorating air. He still faced a considerable journey, but he knew, with a conviction that surprised him, that he was capable. He could evolve. He could embody the man Lydia Rose believed him to be. He would master the art of gentle speech, discovering strength in words rather than fists. He would honor his pledge. Public humiliation, the aroma of aged paper and binding paste, soothed Jeb's raw nerves. His fingers skimmed the golden script on a slim volume of verse. A far cry from the smoky haze and sour tang of the saloons he'd frequented. Early, as always, Lydia Rose's promptness seemed to have dusted him with its own punctuality. Selecting a table, he opened the book, losing himself in verses that crafted visions, not contusions. The library door groaned, a sound that once would have him poised for a brawl. Now, he simply glanced up, anticipating Lydia's amiable greeting. Instead, backlit by the afternoon glare, stood Buck Tanner, a sneer contorting his features. A cold dread coiled in Jeb's stomach, but he suppressed it. "Well now," Buck drawled, his voice echoing in the hushed space. "Look what we have here. Jeb Stone, nose in a book. Who'd have thunk it?" Slowly, Jeb closed the volume, marking his place with a narrow strip of parchment. "What do you want, Buck?" "Just checking if you'd gone soft on us. Word is, you've been spending more time with sonnets than slugfests." "Thought I'd test that theory." Buck advanced, his boots thudding against the timber floor. A small crowd had begun to coalesce near the entrance, their gazes alight with grim fascination. "I've no interest in a fight, Buck." Jeb's tone was even, measured. The old fury flickered, but he wrestled it down. He pictured Lydia, her patient explanations of complex prose, the keen light in her eyes when understanding dawned in his own. He wouldn't fail her. Buck barked a harsh laugh, devoid of mirth. That's what I figured. The notorious Jeb Stone, rendered a milksop by a bookworm. He spat near Jeb's boots. You're a disgrace to this town, Stone. Used to be a man. Now you're just a ghost of your former self. The jeer stung, but Jeb remained planted. I'm trying for something better, Buck. Maybe you should try it sometime. Buck's face hardened to granite. Better? You think fancy words make you superior? You're still the same low-life brawler at heart, and I intend to prove it. He amplified his voice, addressing the growing assembly. Everyone in Bell Rock knows Jeb Stone, thinks he's all talk, but deep down, he's a pugilist, and I'm going to draw him out, here and now. A low murmur rippled through the onlookers, a blend of anticipation and unease. Jeb felt their collective stare, scrutinizing him, waiting for the explosion. He noticed Mrs. Henderson, the baker, her expression a mask of disapproval. Young Billy, his eyes brimming with a hero worship Jeb didn't warrant. Even Martha, the saloon girl with a concealed kindness, her face an enigma. I won't fight you, Buck, Jeb reiterated, his voice resolute. I have nothing to prove. Buck's lips curved into a knowing smirk. Suit yourself, Stone, but don't imagine you're off the hook. He pivoted to address the crowd. Since Stone's too chicken to throw a punch, I'll just have to find an alternate method to demonstrate his cowardice. He paused, malice glinting in his gaze. I understand Miss Lydia Rose has taken quite an interest in our reformed roughneck. Seems she believes he's capable of change. Perhaps she's correct. Maybe all it requires is a little incentive. A wave of possessive rage surged through Jeb, threatening to drown him. He understood Buck's insinuation. He'd use Lydia without hesitation. Leave her out of this, Buck, Jeb rumbled, his hands forming fists. Or what, Stone? You going to strike me? Prove my point? All I have to do is speak the words, and everyone here will understand the kind of man you are. One who hides behind leather-bound stories and the protection of a pro-woman. The crowd's murmur intensified, more insistent, demanding. Jeb felt the pressure mount, the weight of their expectations. He yearned to silence Buck's goading with a swift blow. But that was precisely Buck's aim. A carefully orchestrated trap to shame him and shatter his progress. Precisely then, the library's interior door swung inward, and Lydia stepped through, a stack of volumes cradled in her arms. She smiled at Jeb, her eyes radiating sincere warmth, oblivious to the throng, untouched by Buck's cruel words. Jeb, I found that Whitman collection you wanted, she announced, her voice clear and vibrant. I think you'll find it quite Her eyes widened as the tableau registered. The assembled townsfolk, Buck's aggressive posture, Jeb's tight fists. Comprehension dawned, and her smile dissolved. Buck pounced on the moment. Miss Rose, he simpered, his voice coated in false civility. We were just engaged in a lively debate concerning your protégé. Seems he's lost his stomach for a fight. Perhaps you can reteach him how to be a man. Lydia regarded Jeb, her eyes filled with concern. She knew his past, the darkness he fought to overcome. She also recognized his evolution, the true desire for redemption that flickered within him. Jeb met her gaze, silently imploring her understanding. He couldn't brawl with Buck, not here, not now. But neither could he permit Buck to use her as leverage. He was caught between his former existence and his aspirations, between the man he'd been and the one he hoped to become. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating with unspoken words. The entire town of Bell Rock suspended its breath, waiting to see what Jeb Stone would do next. Turning the other cheek, the golden nugget reeked of stale hops and cedar shavings, every gaze boring into Jeb. Buck Tanner, his features contorted in a contemptuous smirk, discharged a stream of brown spittle perilously close to Jeb's worn leather boots. "Well, Stone? Lost your bark? Or did Rose finally put a leash on you?" A familiar surge of anger kindled within Jeb, the reflexive urge to retaliate, to quell Buck's taunts with a swift, decisive blow. But Lydia's gentle face flickered in his memory, the shadow of sorrow that would darken her eyes if he yielded to his baser instincts. His fists clenched, the knuckles bone-white. "I'm not fighting you, Buck," Jeb stated, his voice a low growl that sliced through the saloon's charged atmosphere. A wave of astonishment washed over the room, a hushed susurrus of disbelief. This wasn't the Jeb Stone known for leveling men over petty squabbles and cheap liquor. This Jeb Stone was evolving. Buck's sneer intensified, carving deeper lines into his weathered face. "What's that, Stone? Mumbling now? Or just yellow-bellied?" He advanced, invading Jeb's personal space, the fetid stench of cheap whiskey and malice suffocating. "Thought you were a man, Stone. My mistake." Jeb stood firm, refusing to rise to the bait, his eyes fixed on a spot beyond Buck's shoulder, striving for composure. "I said, I'm not fighting. I have nothing to prove, certainly not to you." The silence stretched, broken only by the groaning timbers of the old building and the frantic pulse hammering in Jeb's ears. He felt the collective scrutiny, the judgment, the bewilderment. He wondered what Lydia would think if she witnessed this scene. Buck erupted in a raucous guffaw, a jarring sound that reverberated through the room. "Well, I'll be hornswoggled. Jeb Stone, the village ninny, runs from a scrap like a frightened jackrabbit." He gestured theatrically to the crowd, his voice dripping with derision. "Take a good look, everyone. The mighty Jeb Stone, domesticated by a schoolteacher." A nervous chuckle rippled through the crowd. Others shifted, uncertain how to interpret this unexpected turn. The tension hung heavy, a coiled serpent ready to strike. Beneath his controlled exterior, Jeb felt the dormant rage stirring, threatening to erupt. He could taste the coppery tang of adrenaline on his tongue. "Think you're too good for us now, Stone?" Buck persisted, his voice escalating. "Buried in books and sipping tea with that spinster? You imagine that makes you a gentleman?" He spat again, the viscous fluid splattering against Jeb's boot. "You're nothing but a bruiser, Stone. That's all you'll ever be." Jeb glanced at the defilement on his boot, then met Buck's gaze. He saw the animosity, the jealousy, the desperate need to diminish him. He also glimpsed something else, a flicker of vulnerability, almost pity. "You're wrong, Buck," Jeb countered, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I'm trying to improve myself, and I won't let you deter me." He pivoted and started to walk away. The ensuing quiet was profound. Every eye in the Golden Nugget followed him as he strode toward the exit, his spine rigid, his head held high. He felt Buck's gaze like a brand, the weight of the room's collective incomprehension pressing down. As Jeb reached the swinging doors, Buck snapped, "Kick back here, you lilla-livered excuse!" He bellowed, his voice vibrating with uncontrolled fury. He surged forward, seizing Jeb's arm and wrenching him around. "You think you can just dismiss me? You think you can insult me with impunity? Jed fixed his gaze on Buck's hand clamped on his forearm, the knuckles strained with fury. He could easily break free, could effortlessly send Buck sprawling. But he resisted. "Release me, Buck," Jeb instructed, his voice calm despite the tempest raging within. "Not until you fight," Buck roared, his face mere inches from Jeb's. "Not until you prove you still possess the gumption of a man." Jeb peered into Buck's bloodshot eyes, perceiving the desperation, the fear, the hollowness. He understood then that Buck wasn't simply trying to goad him. He was attempting to drag him down to his level, to confine him to the past. "I have nothing to demonstrate to you, Buck," Jeb responded, his tone unwavering. "And I will not engage in fisticuffs." He deliberately, yet firmly, peeled Buck's fingers from his arm. Then, without another utterance, he turned and exited the Golden Nugget, leaving Buck standing there, rendered speechless by a mixture of rage and incredulity. The afternoon sun felt pleasant against Jeb's skin as he stepped onto the parched street. He inhaled deeply, the air untainted by the saloon's miasma. The lingering remnants of adrenaline still coursed through his veins, the impulse to strike out, to silence the clamoring voices in his mind. But he also experienced something novel, a profound sense of inner peace. He had resisted the temptation. He had opted for a different course. He had, in a modest but meaningful manner, become the man Lydia envisioned. He began walking toward the library, his gait lighter now, his spirit somewhat less burdened. He couldn't foresee the future, but he felt confident that he was on the correct path. He was certain that with Lydia's support, he could banish the darkness and discover his way toward the light. Meanwhile, back within the confines of the Golden Nugget, Buck Tanner simmered with resentment. The silence within the saloon throbbed with unanswered questions, with a pervasive atmosphere of unease. He had anticipated a brawl, a spectacle, a return to the familiar order. Instead, he had encountered resignation. He slammed his fist on the counter, causing the glasses to jump and spilling amber liquor across the polished wood. "Damn him to perdition!" he roared, his voice echoing throughout the establishment. He knew, in his heart, that Jeb's refusal to engage was more than a personal affront. It was a challenge to the status quo in Bell Rock. It signaled a transformation, the erosion of established norms. And Buck Tanner, behind his swagger and boastfulness, feared change. He grabbed a bottle of whiskey and took a prolonged, furious gulp. He would devise a way to make Jeb Stone answer for this. He would find a method to reassert himself as the strongest, the most ruthless, the supreme authority in Bell Rock. He simply needed time. And a strategy. Whispers of the past the dry wind carried him in, a dust devil swirling around his polished boots as he stepped off the stagecoach. He was a spectacle of color amidst the muted tones of Bell Rock. A crimson vest, a patterned tie held by a silver slide, and a smile as wide and slick as a freshly oiled wagon wheel. He carried a worn leather valise, its brass clasps glinting in the afternoon sun. "Good day to you all," he boomed, his voice carrying the salesman's practiced charm. "Name's Silas Blackwood, purveyor of fine goods and intriguing tales from across this great land." He set up shop quickly, unfurling a tapestry of wares on a makeshift table outside the general store combs, watches, brightly colored ribbons, and patent medicines promising miraculous cures. A small crowd gathered, drawn by the novelty and the promise of something new. Lydia Rose, returning from delivering books to the schoolhouse, paused, intrigued by the commotion. She recognized a few of her regulars among the onlookers, their faces alight with curiosity. Jeb Stone was leaning against the wall of the saloon, watching Silas Blackwood with narrowed eyes. He felt a prickling unease, a sense of familiarity he couldn't quite place. The salesman's voice, the way he held himself, something about it, stirred a memory he'd buried deep. Silas Blackwood surveyed the crowd, his gaze lingering momentarily on Lydia before sweeping across the rest of the faces. Then his eyes locked onto Jeb. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile that held no warmth. "Well, now, isn't this a surprise?" he drawled, his voice suddenly laced with a different kind of charm. A predatory kind. "If it isn't Jeb Stone, or should I say the Hammer?" A ripple of silence spread through the crowd. The Hammer. The name echoed through Jeb's past, a past he desperately wanted to leave behind. He straightened, his jaw tightening. He hadn't heard that name in years. It was a relic of a life lived in smoky saloons and back-alley brawls, a life he'd vowed to bury. Lydia frowned, a knot forming in her stomach. She'd never heard Jeb called that before. She looked at him, searching his face for an explanation, but found only a grim mask of resignation. Silas Blackwood relished the attention. He knew he had them all now, hooked on the promise of a story. "For those of you who don't know," he said, his voice dripping with false congeniality. Mr. Stone here was quite the celebrity back in his day, a champion fighter, a regular whirlwind of fists and fury. "Why, I remember one time, in Dodge City," he paused for dramatic effect, his eyes gleaming. "He took on 3 men at once, and left them all twitching on the floor like landed fish." A gasp went through the crowd. Whispers erupted, heads turning to stare at Jeb with a mixture of fear and fascination. The image of the quiet, thoughtful man they'd come to know clashed violently with the picture Silas Blackwood was painting. "He's changed," Lydia said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. She stepped forward, placing a hand on Jeb's arm. Her touch was light, but firm, a silent declaration of support. "He's not that man anymore." Silas Blackwood chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Oh, I wouldn't be so sure, miss. A leopard doesn't change its spots, and a brawler doesn't forget how to throw a punch." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried easily on the still air. "Besides, I know a few things about Mr. Stone that would make your hair curl. Things he's probably conveniently forgotten to mention." Jeb's grip tightened into fists, his knuckles white. The air crackled with unspoken threat. He wanted to silence Silas, to erase the words hanging in the air, to protect Lydia from the truth. But he knew that violence was not the answer, not anymore. Silas pressed on, sensing his advantage. "Remember that little incident in Tombstone, Jeb? The one with the card game and the unfortunate accident? Seems a shame the good people of Bell Rock don't know about that." Jeb's eyes flashed with a pain that went beyond anger. It was the pain of a man confronted with the ghosts of his past, the pain of knowing he could never truly escape the consequences of his actions. He looked at Lydia, her face a mixture of concern and disbelief. He saw the question in her eyes, the unspoken plea for him to deny it all. He couldn't. He looked back at Silas, his voice low and gravelly. "Leave it be, Silas. Some things are best left buried." "Buried? Why, Jeb, where's the fun in that?" Silas smirked. "Especially when it involves a certain dead man and a missing pot of gold." The whispers intensified, swirling around Jeb like a malevolent wind. The past he had fought so hard to escape had come crashing down upon him, threatening to bury him alive. He had wanted to become someone new, someone worthy of Lydia's respect. But now, his carefully constructed facade was crumbling, revealing the dark, and violent man he once was. Lydia slowly removed her hand from Jeb's arm. The question in her eyes had been replaced with a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher. Was it fear? Disappointment? Or something else entirely? He couldn't bear to look at her any longer. He turned and walked away, the weight of his past heavy on his shoulders. The whispers of the crowd following him like a curse. The sound of Silas Blackwood's laughter echoed in his ears, a mocking reminder that some debts can never be repaid. He walked towards the edge of town, away from the judging eyes, away from Lydia, away from the man he desperately wanted to be. He was alone again, with only the ghosts of his past for company. Words of truth the library's silence pressed in, as palpable as the sun-drenched dust motes suspended in the air. Lydia, balancing a teetering tower of books, watched Jeb through the window. Shoulders squared against the world, he attacked the woodpile with a ferocity that echoed the turmoil within her own heart. Silas Blackwood's accusations reverberated poisonous barbs aimed at the man she'd believed she knew. The hammer, tombstone, a vanished fortune. The whole story felt like a cruel distortion of Jeb's true self. With a sigh, she set the books down, the soft thump unnaturally loud in the stillness. Smoothing her skirt, she drew a steadying breath and ventured into the chill autumn air. The steady rhythm of the axe faltered, ceased as Jeb sensed her approach. He turned, his features a complex map of unease and a flicker of something akin to guilt. "Jeb," she began, her voice betraying her with a tremor. "Silas, what he told me, is it real?" A muscle twitched in his jaw, betraying his inner struggle. The axe clattered to the earth, its metallic ring a sharp punctuation in the tranquil afternoon. He avoided her gaze, focusing on the fractured wood beneath his boots. "Parts of it," he admitted, the words nearly lost among the whispering leaves. "Parts of it?" she echoed, incredulity sharpening her tone. "He spoke of a life of violence, Jeb, a life you kept hidden." Finally, his stormy eyes met hers. "Because it's a life I'm desperately trying to escape, Lydia, one I'm ashamed of." She edged closer, her gaze unwavering. "Tell me everything." He sighed, a sound freighted with regret. Raking a hand through his already tousled hair, he left a pale smear of sawdust in his wake. Tombstone. It was a different era. Different rules applied. I was younger, more reckless a fool. He hesitated, searching for the right phrasing. I was skilled with my fists, perhaps too skilled. I fought for coin, for reputation, for the oblivion promised by whiskey. The hammer, Lydia breathed, the moniker leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. He nodded, shame clouding his features. It was a name they gave me, one I'd earned. There was a dispute over a claim. A gold claim. Things spiraled out of control. People were injured. Someone disappeared. Lydia's breath caught in her throat. Disappeared? Silas implied murder? No. Jeb's denial was immediate, forceful. I never murdered anyone, Lydia. Never. There was a brawl, yes. A brutal one. But I didn't kill him. He fled. Taking the gold, some claimed. Others speculated otherwise. I don't know. I swear, I don't. The genuine honesty burning in his gaze, the raw anguish in his tone, was undeniable. Yet, doubt persisted, an insidious vine clinging to her heart. And the gold, Jeb? Did you steal it? He shook his head, a gesture of profound weariness. I never got the gold. I walked away. I left Tombstone, trying to outrun my own shadow. I've been running ever since. Until you arrived here, Lydia finished, her voice softer now. Until I arrived here, he mirrored, and discovered something worth fighting for, someone worth changing for. He advanced, reaching for her hand. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then yielded. His touch was rough, calloused, yet possessed a surprising tenderness. "Lydia, I understand your thoughts, that I'm a charlatan, a deceiver, that I'm not who you believed me to be." "I don't know what to believe, Jeb," she admitted, her voice a mere whisper. "I'm conflicted. I see the man you are now, the man who delights in poetry, who assists elderly Mrs. Gable with her groceries, who regards me with, quote, with kindness." But then Silas's words echo, and I glimpse the phantom of someone else. Someone violent, someone dangerous. "Fading, Lydia," he entreated, his grip firming on her hand, or at least, he's struggling to. "You've been my savior, more than you realize. You revealed to me there's more to existence than brawls and whiskey. You awakened the power of stories, the allure of words, the potential for redemption." He paused, searching her face. "I recognize I cannot rewrite the past. I cannot undo the deeds I've committed. But I can strive to atone. I can endeavor to be a better man. For you, for myself. But I cannot accomplish it alone." Lydia met his gaze, scrutinizing for any hint of deception. All she found was sincerity, regret, and a desperate plea. She saw a man haunted by his former life, undoubtedly, but also a man struggling toward a brighter future. A man who had found solace in books, in erudition, in her. She took a long, deliberate breath, the crisp air filling her lungs. "The truth, Jeb, always the truth, regardless of its ugliness, regardless of the pain it inflicts." He nodded, his gaze brimming with gratitude. "Always." She squeezed his hand, her reservations gradually dissolving like mist in the sun. "Then demonstrate it to me. Prove to me that the man Silas portrayed is truly banished. Prove to me that the man I see before me is the real you." "I will," he pledged, his voice unwavering. "I promise you, Lydia, I will." He lifted her hand to his lips, placing a feather-like kiss against her knuckles. The air thrummed with unspoken emotions, a confluence of fear, hope, and a tender, burgeoning love. The specter of Tombstone still lingered, a dark cloud looming on the horizon, but for the moment, in the peaceful haven of the woodpile, enveloped by the aroma of sawdust and decaying leaves, they stood together, bound by a shared aspiration for a more promising future. The force of honesty, the spoken truth, had begun to heal the rifts in their bond, forming a link stronger than any accusation, any shade of the past. The path to redemption was far from complete, but they would confront it side by side, equipped with the courage to speak honestly and the steadfast conviction in the possibility of transformation. A new beginning. The mingled odors of aged paper and beeswax created a familiar, comforting atmosphere, as ingrained in Jeb's senses as the toughened skin on his palms. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, igniting a silent ballet of dust motes. At a solid oak table, he painstakingly mended a tattered map of the Arizona Territory, his large hands surprisingly nimble with the delicate task. Opposite him, Lydia meticulously logged a recent book delivery, her brow creased in thought as she catalogued each item. The typewriter's staccato rhythm provided a subtle harmony to the library's hushed ambiance. A year had turned since Silas's arrival, a period marked by gradual, intentional change. The mutters hadn't disappeared entirely. Some townspeople still regarded him warily, recalling the man who rode into Bell Rock under a cloud of suspicion. Yet, the majority, swayed by Lydia's steadfast belief and his own tangible efforts at betterment, were beginning to embrace him. Lydia paused, tucking a loose strand of hair behind an ear. "Finished that section of Moby Dick?" she inquired, her voice gentle yet distinct. Jeb glanced up, a genuine smile tugging at his lips. "Indeed, Miss Rose. Ahab's got a real obsession, that's certain." He closed the volume, marking his place with a faded ribbon. "Never imagined I'd find myself invested in a whale, but Melville crafts a compelling tale." A warm melodic chuckle escaped her lips, a sound that never failed to quicken his pulse. "He does possess that gift. It's the magic of narrative, Jeb. It can whisk you away, evoke emotions you never knew you possessed." He nodded, pondering her words. He understood that power intimately. The stories she'd shared had revealed a world beyond barroom brawls, a realm of thought and feeling he'd never considered. "Speaking of narratives," he noted, gesturing toward the restored map, "this one's nearly ready for the school. The children are eager to explore the land." Lydia's smile deepened. "They are indeed. And they are fortunate to have you guiding them. You have a knack for making history resonate." He shrugged, self-conscious under her praise. "Just contributing where I can." He hesitated, then added, "Quite a change from prospecting and other pursuits." The unspoken words lingered between them, a shadow of the past they were both striving to outrun. Lydia reached across the table, her hand briefly covering his. Her touch was light, encouraging. "It is a transformation, and I am proud of the man you are becoming, Jeb." Her honeyed eyes conveyed a sincerity that invariably left him breathless. He returned her gentle squeeze. "Couldn't have managed it without you, Miss Rose." The afternoon unfolded, filled with the library's quiet diligence. Patrons drifted in and out, seeking knowledge and refuge within its walls. Jeb aided a young boy in locating an astronomy book, patiently elucidating constellations and the mysteries of the heavens. He assisted an elderly woman in tracing her ancestry, guiding her through census records and aging periodicals. Each exchange represented a small act of recompense, a silent testament to his dedication to this newfound life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting long shadows across the settlement, people began to assemble in the library's reading room. Reading night, a weekly event initiated by Lydia to cultivate a love for literature, had blossomed into a cherished tradition in Bell Rock. And Jeb, unexpectedly, had become a central figure. He stood before the gathering, a book of poetry in his grasp. He cleared his throat, his voice still tinged with the roughness of his former life, but now tempered with a newfound poise and depth. His gaze swept over the assembled faces. Farmers, ranchers, merchants, children, all expectant to hear the verses he would share. He began to recite, the words flowing not as a shout, but as a soft, resonant tenor. He selected a poem by Walt Whitman, celebrating the splendor of nature and the dignity of labor. As he spoke, he witnessed faces illuminate, their eyes reflecting the images he conjured with his voice. He watched the children's imaginations soar, the farmer's appreciation for the land intensify, the merchant's sense of community solidify. He read with fervor, understanding, a burgeoning appreciation for the power of language. He wasn't simply reading, he was revealing a part of himself, long buried beneath layers of anger and regret. He was demonstrating that even a man marked by a violent past could find solace and meaning in the loveliness of words. Silence descended upon the room when he finished, followed by a surge of applause. He glanced at Lydia, standing at the rear, her eyes gleaming with pride. Her radiant, heartfelt smile conveyed everything. After the reading, as the crowd thinned, Jeb started to gather his belongings. Lydia approached, her hand lightly touching his arm. "That was beautiful, Jeb," she murmured. "You possess a gift." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the accolade. "Just reading words, Miss Rose." "No, you're doing more than that. You're animating them. You're sparking emotions." She paused, then added, "You have traveled so far." He regarded her, his heart overflowing with, quote, "gratitude. Entirely due to you." He reached for her hand, enfolding it in his own. "You perceived something within me that I couldn't even see myself." She squeezed his hand in return. "I saw a good man buried under a great deal of sorrow." Her gaze drifted around the empty library, the silence punctuated only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "This place, this town, it has become your haven, hasn't it?" He nodded. "It truly has. And you are the reason." He leaned down, his lips grazing her forehead. "Thank you, Lydia," he whispered, "for everything." As they exited the library together, hand in hand, moonlight cast a silvery luminescence over Bell Rock. The air was invigorating, carrying the fragrance of pine and sage. The future remained uncertain, yet for the first time in what felt like forever, Jeb felt hope bloom within him. He had discovered a purpose, a belonging, and a love he had never deemed possible. His past might still haunt him, but it no longer defined him. He was a work in progress, a man struggling toward improvement, aspiring to be worthy of the woman who had placed her faith in him when no one else did. The path ahead would undoubtedly be fraught, but he knew, with unwavering conviction, that he would not have to navigate it alone. Lydia was by his side, and together they would confront whatever lay ahead. He was no longer the hammer. He was Jeb Stone, a man finding his voice, crafting a new beginning, one word, one action, one day at a time.